What happened to Nancy Guthrie? It's the question that still hasn't been answered now 12 days after she vanished. The FBI says they're tracking persons of interest, but the identity of the masked person caught on NY's doorstep remains a mystery. And now with these chilling images revealed, the question is bigger than ever. Who took the 84-year-old? We are digging into it all. We're on the case present, just trying to figure out what happened to the mom of today's show host Savannah Guthrie. And there are so many theories that are out there, so much speculation. Frankly, it can be exhausting looking at all the speculation. Now, we investigated 5 theories that may end up being the direction that law enforcement takes in investigating this case. Now, before we dive into these theories, I do want to break down some of the latest information that we know at this point. One of them, gloves. A pair of gloves reportedly found on the side of a road near Nancy Guthrie's home. And according to local media as well as the New York Post, those gloves are now being tested for DNA to see if they are somewhat connected to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. Now, many people are also pointing to the videos of the masked and armed individual who was seen on Guthrie's doorstep the morning that she vanished on February 1st. And there are so many questions about who this person is, whether they know the Guthrie, and if they physically took Nancy, or was the person that we see here just a potential partner in crime who tampered with the cameras. So, let's dive into some of the theories that have been suggested as this story has developed. And just to be clear, these are all just possibilities and theories. The sheriff and the FBI, they have remained very quiet about any potential leads or suspects in the case. So, the first theory we're talking about today is a classic, frankly, for anyone who watches long crime or takes in true crime content. And it's the first step of any kind of investigation. Police look at the people closest to the crime that whoever took Nancy Guthrie was a member of the Guthrie family. Now, in the hours before Nancy vanished, she was at her daughter Annie's house in Tucson for dinner. What we know is that Nancy Ubered to Annie's house, which is just about 10 minutes away from her home, around 5:30. It was a nice family night. They had dinner, they played games, and then a family member drives her back to her own home at 9:45-ish. Now the sheriff won't say specifically what family member drove Nancy home, NY's daughter's house. That's been the focus of a lot of law enforcement activity. We see law enforcement going back to Annie's home almost on a daily basis, and we have seen them talk to neighbors of Annie asking if there is any sort of doorbell camera, surveillance camera, that can help them piece together what happened on the night before Nancy Guthrie disappeared. In fact, on Wednesday night, investigators were seen going into Annie's home again, and then they came out reportedly with a bag. Unclear what was in the bag, but they had gloves on. And it's been reported that Annie and her husband are no longer staying at that house. And that's understandable because police and the FBI continue to comb through it. And there is so much media attention outside their home as well. Now, it is unclear why law enforcement continues to focus on Annie's home beyond the fact that Nancy was there prior to her disappearance. Now, the Guthrie family said that when the surveillance pictures were released, they didn't recognize the person as someone who they knew. Savannah Guthrie is very close with her family. Annie is her older sister. She also has a brother named Cameron. And we've seen the 3 of them arm in arm in videos posted last week saying that they would pay the ransom money to whoever sent those alleged notes to media outlets like TMZ. This is very valuable to us, and we will pay. Now, as a reminder, everything that we have heard from the FBI and the Sheriff's Department has been that the family's been very cooperative. When deputies went to Annie's house to search it last weekend at night, that was a consensual search. They didn't need a search warrant to do it. Now, it should be noted that former News Nation journalist Ashley Banfield released a report on her YouTube channel, Drop Dead Serious, seemingly pointing the finger at a family member, NY's son-in-law. Hours after her report, the Pima County Sheriff's Department fired back on social media, tweeting, quote, "Detectives are working closely with the Guthrie family. While we appreciate the public's concern, the sharing of unverified accusations or false information is irresponsible and does not assist the investigation. No suspect or person of interest have been identified at this time. Now, another potential possibility in this case is that whoever took Nancy Guthrie was someone who is targeting Savannah. She's hosted the Today Show since 2012. She is one of the most recognizable faces on TV. She interviews celebrities, presidents, and other powerful people. She has spoken with President Trump, who offered his full support in this case. She's connected, and she has money. Could that make her and her family a target? And the Pima County Sheriff said that his department has been in touch with NBC security to see if Savannah's received any sort of threat or anything that might be of interest to this case. Nancy Guthrie's also been a regular on the Today Show. In fact, her last appearance on the show spotlighted her love of Tucson. That was in November of last year. The segment talked about how she moved to Tucson in the 1970s, and she decided to stay in the area to raise her family because of the laid-back and gentle quality of life. Savannah went to college and high school in Tucson before she followed her dreams in a career in television news. Now, it is possible that someone knew that Nancy was in that community based on what they saw on TV. It's unclear if that's the case here, but something that you do have to think about. Now, one of the big questions as this case has been developing is who had access to Nancy Guthrie's house. We know that she lived alone, but she also had health issues. The sheriff said that she couldn't walk 50 yards by herself, but she was still sharp mentally. But the medication, that's been such a big concern. The sheriff saying she needs medication daily. Without it, it could be fatal. Now, Nancy needed help. And apparently, she did have some help in the form of people like a pool cleaner or gardener who would come to her property. According to Fox News, hired help has been asked to give DNA swabs in the case. Now, another person who said that he may have been at Nancy Guthrie's home at some point is Carlos Palazuelo. Now, he's the delivery driver who was detained Tuesday night in Rio Rico, Arizona, about an hour south of Tucson, near the U.S.-Mexico border. They helped me against my will. They didn't give me my rights until 2 hours later. Okay, you know what I mean. My wrist is all swollen from the clean. And did you have any idea what this was about? Do you know who Nancy Guthrie was about? No, I don't know anything. You were like, this is video per CBS News. Carlos said he had nothing to do with Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. In fact, he said he had never heard of Nancy Guthrie. He had never heard of Savannah Guthrie until law enforcement pulled him over while he was driving for DoorDash. And so then when they came up on you, what did they say? Like, what did they say? Nothing, literally nothing. They just told me to stop on me. Like, what's your name? Carlos, that's it. They put me in the cop car. You got to wait like 2 hours. I wait like 2 hours until the detectives get here and everything. Oh my God. When they finally told you this had to do with some kidnapping, like what were you thinking? What I doing? I ain't do anything, to be honest, like I'm innocent. And you don't even know who the lady is. Do you know who Savannah Gunn is? No, I don't follow the news, right? I don't like you don't watch the Today Show. No. So this was a complete shock. It was. Now, even though Carlos has been adamant he has nothing to do with the Guthrie case, it's important to note that law enforcement said that they did have a search warrant to go through his house, meaning that investigators had to present evidence to a judge, who then signed off on allowing them to search his house and take his electronics. We are learning more now about why law enforcement may have circled in on Carlos, or more specifically his home. ABC News is reporting that the FBI ID'd Carlos based off cell phone usage information and traffic data. Now, it's unclear specifically what about those things made law enforcement believe that Carlos would be someone that they would want to talk to. Carlos suggested that, as a delivery driver, he may have dropped off a package at NY's house during the day. He works for a different delivery company than DoorDash in the Tucson area. So that is a possibility, but again, they would need more evidence than that to get a search warrant. Carlos's mother-in-law told reporters that law enforcement showed her the surveillance pictures and asked if it was her son-in-law, and she said no. But when you hear that, you do wonder if law enforcement truly believed that they were on the cusp of breaking this case wide open on Tuesday night. Now, when you hear about electronics, you have to think about the alleged ransom notes sent to TMZ and at least 2 Tucson television stations demanding money for Nancy Guthrie. Now, it's unclear whether those notes are legit. TMZ says that their sources tell them the FBI is operating on the belief that the notes were sent by the person or persons responsible for allegedly taking Nancy Guthrie. However, we have heard some skepticism from law enforcement experts. On one hand, those notes mention specifics that may not have been public at the time they were sent. The FBI said that it talked about NY's Apple Watch still being in the house and something about floodlights on the outside of the home. Those floodlights have since been removed. Now, on the other hand, those notes were sent a day after Nancy was taken. The notes also had 2 deadlines, and whoever sent the notes never communicated further to our understanding with law enforcement or the Guthrie family. And they never offered any sort of proof of life images that we know about. Another theory that we have seen suggested is whoever took Nancy Guthrie was a member of a larger criminal organization, even a cartel from just over the border in Mexico. We know that FBI Director Kash Patel said that law enforcement is looking for multiple persons of interest in this case, but it's unclear how sophisticated the people who may have taken Nancy Guthrie are as criminals. I asked former CIA and FBI agent Tracy Walder about whether any part of this case seems to point in the direction of a cartel. Cartel doesn't completely make sense to me. Cartels, yes, they do ransoms and those kinds of things, but cartels tend to be quite brutal and quite showy with the violence that they inflict on people. And they don't seem to care necessarily. So what I would think if Mexico is even involved, which I don't even know that it is, and they said they have not engaged with officials in Mexico. If they are even involved, it's more likely that someone here took her there rather than someone there coming here. Joining us now to talk more about this case and where it could go next is Chris McDana, homicide investigator. Thank you for being with us here on Law and Crime. It seems like, and just as we're coming on and recording this, they just put a tent out in front of the doorway to Nancy Guthrie's home. That's where we saw the video of the blood, and potentially that's where this armed individual was the morning of February 1st when Nancy Guthrie was taken. But each day it seems like there's still a lot of activity at her house in her neighborhood as well as Annie's house, her oldest daughter. What do you make of investigators continuing to go back to those areas now 12 days later? You know, Chris, I think what's happening right now, based on the video coming back, there's a lot of lab stuff starting to return, right, like this video. And if you'll notice in that particular video, you see the suspect standing on that mat, the outdoor mat. You also see the debris that was still on the porch. Okay, even before the video came in. So they're probably going to process that mat out there. And that's maybe why they put the tent up in front of the door there. Okay, because there's a system that you can use. It's called an MVAC system. And what you can physically do, it's like a vacuum cleaner that essentially sucks up any type of debris or anything like that. And you can actually take that and test it for DNA. So my suspicion is at this particular point, they probably have another DNA hit somewhere, or in terms of information that's come back. And so you're going to start seeing situations like this, where they're going to canvass the neighborhoods a lot more. They're going to be looking for digital footprints because they probably got digital evidence back now, and they're trying to tie those things together. You know, law enforcement has continued to say that they don't have a suspect or person of interest in this case. We have these images. They detained this man the other day, but then let him go. You still see them going to Annie Guthrie's house a lot, and that's where Nancy was for dinner, game night with family. And then she's driven back home on February, or I guess it was January 31st, and then February 1st she's taken. What do you make about just the focus there seems to be? And it's all consensual searches that from what we've been told. It's not like a search warrant that they need to go in. It seems like the family's very cooperative. But what do you make of just the amount of attention that we have seen on the place, not that she was taken from, but the place she was before? So in remember in the victim risk continuum, right? This is a very, very low-risk victim, very low risk. And Sothet tells us that you know the victim and the suspect at some point had some type of association, i.e. they crossed paths, could have been a grocery store, could have been an employee. You know a friend of an employee. But there is this nexus that connects it. The reason they keep going back there is because the family, you, Annie, and I believe her husband, the brother-in-law, has said, hey, we were the last to see her alive. We were also the first to discover that she wasn't in the house. So they were the first and the last, okay. And an interesting anomaly that I've caught from, my experience is the garage door. So the sheriff puts on the timeline, the garage door opens at 9:48 p.m. and then it closes at 9:50. So that tells us they have that data from that garage door, either the keypad or the system there, right? But what we're not seeing is when the family arrived, a timeline if that garage door opened. So that means that leaves this gap that says, okay, well, how did they get into the house? If they went through the front door, they certainly had to see all that blood. If they went through the garage door, you're going to get that data that they may be holding back. Okay. And then the third option is how did they go through the same point of entry that the perpetrator may have gone through? So those are kind of investigative anomalies that you have to cross those T's and dot those I's and say, okay, well, did you see the blood on the porch? If you went through the garage, how come we don't have a data point on that? If you went through the back door, wasn't that suspicious enough almost immediately, to call the authorities? And if you notice, the very, very first interview that the sheriff gave, the first thing he was asked by a journalist was who dropped her off. And he says the family. And then the follow-up question, which was a great question, was did they see her inside of the house? And he answers yes. Okay, that's very problematic. So he knows something that we don't know, cuz that was that and then keep going back to that part because the follow-up is another follow-up was just like who was the family member. We know that Annie Guthrie's married, and then there's been this report that was put out there where that her husband his name has been out there. And there's been nothing Tathai's point that has publicly by law enforcement said that that they have a suspect at all. So, it's like when the sheriff was asked who was the person, and we don't know specifically who's the person who drove Nancy Guthrie home, and he's not answering it. Do you read anything into that? Or is it something where he might just say because of the media attention on this person, just to protect them? Because if you throw their name out there in a news conference, then suddenly the internet tries to incriminate someone even more if they're completely innocent. Yeah. No. That's a great point, and I think the sheriff did the right thing by kind of holding back, because at that point, everybody's on the table at this point, right? Because you have to start, in that inner circle like we were talking about there, because in that inner circle is that cross. Okay. However, there is one other interesting point on this. The fruit cake out in LA who decides to inject themselves into the largest, a kidnapping case, probably since the Lindbergh baby, okay, in terms of publicity and etc. And this guy just decides to say, yeah, I think I'll just go ahead and ask, for Bitcoin, etc. They have to eliminate that guy too, because you have to ask yourself, well, why didn't you communicate with Savannah? Why didn't you communicate with her brother? Okay, you chose to communicate with her sister via text message. But you notice the anomaly in this is this guy also says, yeah, and I reached out to the brother-in-law. Okay. Well, the brother-in-law is not even on the radar at that point. So you got to ask yourself, well, why are you picking the brother-in-law to communicate? And then the next piece of this puzzle in that affidavit is the authorities have said he makes a 9-second phone call, the suspect in LA, but they don't tell us to who. Okay. They just said a family member. Okay. So that to me stuck out. It's like, well, why is this guy inject himself into this case, to get arrested? That's crazy. And then the second piece is, well, who did he call? I'd like to know that. And then so as an investigator, you're going to have to unwind all of that. You're going to have to re-engineer it as a whole. What do you make of the ransom notes? Does that follow the pattern of how a ransom note typically operates? And then at the same time, it's like if you're someone who's sending a ransom note, do you want to follow the path that every other ransom note has? Because in a lot of these cases, we know the FBI is very good at tracking down people who send ransom notes. So, does the fact that it might be a little different with when the ransom note was sent out? If you enjoyed this video and want more content like this, make sure you hit that like button, thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. Turn on notifications bell and be part of the journey.